I'm Veda Ajamu, Chief Engagement Officer at the historic National Civil Rights Museum located at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. Today, we are here to talk to you about the National Civil Rights Museum's Corporate Equity Center, the C-Suite Initiative Training Program. I have joining with me some amazing leaders and experts in the field. In fact, they are consultants as well as facilitators for this training. So I'm going to start with Ryan Jones, Associate Curator and Historian for the National Civil Rights Museum, Dr. Janet Taylor, Community Psychiatrist, and Valerie Rainford, CEO of Valerie Talent Strategies. Thank you so much for being here today. I would like to just dive in to talk about the C-Suite Initiative Training Program. You have been instrumental in the development as well as facilitating this training. So I want to hear from you about the different components of this training. We've divided into 3 parts. That's the historical, psychological, and analytical. I'm going to start with you, Ryan. Please share the uniqueness of this training.
Well, Ms. Vita, thank you for having me here, and it's an honor to serve with Dr. Janet and Ms. Valerie as well. The DEI C-Suite training here at the National Civil Rights Museum is an unforgettable experience, and what better place than to have this sort of training at the site of where the apostle of nonviolence, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., shared his last breath on April 4th, 1968. History matters, and the more history you know, the more power that you are embodied with. And so this story is an American story. This is something that can appeal to each and every single person that comes into this museum. This story is empowering, but it could be traumatic. But the intent on learning this history and to fully embrace it is to acknowledge that some of these things didn't happen ancient times ago. We're just 60 years from the moment in which segregation was found illegal in this country. And so when we are talking and inviting corporate America to come and learn the discrepancies between systemic racism from then and carrying it to the future today, it's important. Some of the things that we do here on the very first day of the training is we go through a full guided tour of the National Civil Rights Museum. And so that picks up on the coasts of Jamestown, Virginia, when enslaved Africans were brought to this country. And it takes you through this 400-long history of American history that carries us through boycotts, pickets, sit-ins, desegregation efforts in education, all the way to the moment of Dr. King's death. And then we have a debrief. We talk about those feelings. There are a lot of emotions that are going on when you go on this tour. And it gives you an opportunity to let your vulnerability speak and about how it impacts you. And then it carries you from 1968 to today. This history, the civil rights movement didn't end when Dr. King was assassinated. So there were movements that came after that. There was still tragedy that occurred, but there was still room to become educated and empowered on this topic. And one of the ways that we do that is by showing artifacts that lets you use that interactivity with these rare objects to understand, to connect this story, to humanize the story on that spill.
Yeah, well, thanks, Ryan, and thanks. I love working with all of you. And there's nothing in my mind as important as the significance of walking into this building. That certainly starts with from the outside, the Lorraine Motel, and just knowing that history, but then walking inside and starting with the history of slavery and being able to hear so many facts from Ryan Jones and see them, and you feel the love that went into building every single exhibit. From a brain perspective, our brain is shaped by experience, and the significance, and again, historical impact of slavery and the impact of oppression and the impact of discrimination and inequity that has followed and has continued because of that really is why we are doing this. Because when you look at what the determinants of health are, which are related to housing, schooling, environmental injustice, social injustice, criminal injustice, all of those can be rooted back to the history of slavery in this country, and certainly from a constitutional basis, how we were purposefully left out of it. So when you think about the brain being shaped by experience and the history of bias and racism and oppression and how that really plays a role in every single decision that's made, the opportunity to start with such a rich history, to go into the brain, and we know that the brain contains everything, and then to hear, Val's part about equity and the case for equity, it just really is a unique experience. I wish not just C-suite leaders, but every American could experience. But when you look at the significance of economic inequality and the fact that we have historically been taught that Black people, wrongly taught, were inferior, and how can we right that wrong than to make the case of understanding why and then show the what and how things need to change. So it's a really, really rich experience. Every time I come here, I learn something new and walk away really ready to fight in the sense of for equality, but also really immensely proud of the sacrifices that my ancestors made, your ancestors made for justice, and how we have to keep pushing for that.
What's unique about the C-Suite initiative? The first is not just the name, right? Like when we were developing this program, we know that power starts at the top of organizations. And so we specifically designed this program as an immersive offsite experience for CEOs and their leadership teams. So the C-Suite initiative is about, the CEO, he or she, bringing their CFO, CIO, CDO, CHRO, CRO, whatever the C is, we wanted to bring them together to this place. That was sort of point number one. And point number two is when we thought about what was missing elsewhere. Most organizations are sending their leaders to something that's related to bias, unconscious bias, neuroscience, something of that nature. But those leaders they go to a session, maybe two, maybe one a year, but they don't have anything to connect it to, right? And so how could we use that as a core, but then also deal with the issue that knowledge of African American history in this country is uneven. And the more you have global leaders running global organizations, they have no experience with what our experience and our ancestors' experience is and what we bring to the workplace, right? So grounding it in this place, in a personal journey of, as Ryan said, 400 years of history. History that this country is still built on, right? And being able to walk this building and have someone as knowledgeable as Ryan answer any and every question was sort of a second part, right? And then sort of bringing that, wrapping that with the piece that I spend my time doing, which is showing leaders how inequity still exists in the people practices of the organizations that they lead. So they can no longer say, well, I'm not the problem, it's the person over there. Or we don't have a problem, we run on meritocracy, right? And so the construction of a program that has the three pieces that organizations and leaders inside the organization are missing and not connecting, and doing that within a 2-day period of time and giving the leaders time to do that as a team, it's much more impactful in changing organizations because they all go back ready for action. And then arming them with action and tools is the other thing that we do. We teach them what to look for. We teach them in Janet's component, like how to interact in a multicultural business environment. And so it's well worth the 2-day experience. And I think every person that has come through this place that I hear of says their life has been changed.
Absolutely. I totally agree. The feedback that we receive is that this is this is a transformational experience, a life-changing experience. These are actual words that's being used. And people are saying that they weren't aware of certain things, right? So the idea of a group of leaders going through this training together and even learning for the first time and talking with their colleagues of some of their experiences. So this is truly a journey, right? We're having them to go on this journey with us, and that's how we start the conversation, the training, asking them to do that, to have an open mind and just be present throughout this experience. And the 2 days, you mentioned the 2 days, right? And I mentioned that early on. So one of the things that I would say, challenge not so much, but one of the questions come up is about the 2 days.
Right.
2 days, as a CEO, I don't have 2 days.
It's usually someone who's working for the CEO who
right,
says that.
right. And even some of the C-suite leaders, they think that it's challenging because they're thinking, oh, this is just going to be a training that we've gone through before. But what we hear is that they've not experienced a training with these components and how well the training well the training is designed to touch on these different parts, because you're looking at the different perspectives, you're looking at the heart, you're touching on all the senses, all of those different things. So let's talk about how at the end of this training, we have C-suite leaders that say, oh,
That wasn't long enough.
that wasn't long enough. May we have more time? And this is across industries, right? And in fact, our last training, they was like, do we have to leave for real?
Yeah.
Can we have more time? So let's talk about how we can assure people that the 2 days, this experience is worthwhile based on the feedback that you've received.
Well, for me, I would say, so we understand why 2 days is important for those folks and how hard it is to get an entire leadership team away from the business for 2 days. And so we accommodate the 2 days. If we had three, we would use three, right? But we have put the best of all three of these components into, it's a little less than 2 days, by the way. It's about a day and a half, right? But we have the best of, what I like to say is the equivalent of a K through 12 education on African American history with Ryan Jones, right? And then a mini course about neuroscience with Dr. Taylor. And then we make it action-packed in helping them brainstorm with each other while they're here, so they know what they're gonna do when they go back. We could do a little bit more in each one of those components, but we know how to give them exactly what they need to go back and take action with those 2 days. And everybody, yeah, they wanna stay longer, but we give them enough that they can go back and make change immediately upon leaving.
And I would add, if learning about Black history and slavery and oppression and all of those things were enough to move the needle, we could gladly ship books or video. But we know when you're talking about committable change and action, you need to be here to experience all of it, so that when you walk away, you're not just transformed and inactive, you're transformed and you go back and take the amazing learnings that Val has about how to look for discrepancies and change and take positive steps within your organization. You're ready to make that commitment and take that action. And that's really what we're talking about.
This is a difficult history, and difficult history is hard to take in sometimes in such a small period of time. But these aren't ideas that the three of us came up with. These are facts. The history that's in this museum didn't just happen. It actually were factual things that occurred. The data that is used with Dr. Janet and Ms. Valerie are facts. It's straight data. So it's clear and uncut that, this history is so important. But I think that being in the space, hearing the voices, the voices of those that were on the Middle Passage, to hear the iconic speeches of the Dr. Kings, the Fannie Lou Hamers, and every someone, whether you're 8 years old up to 80 years old, you will find and see yourself in this museum. And so not only do you take this back to your corporate groups, but you will apply some of these things in your daily life. So the National Civil Rights Museum, something inside of this museum and in this training will carry on in perpetuity in your daily life.
Peter, there's two more. One other point that I think you said that I just want to put a pin in, and that's the point of the togetherness. Like, I think that there's something really unique and different about the leadership team of an organization going through the 2 days together. They move at different paces through each component, but they leave here locked arms that they want to make their organizations better, and that they also, to Ryan's point, want to help their families understand, right? And so I think it's an amazing opportunity for people to get some information and tools in a matter of 48 hours that you'll never, ever forget.
Yeah, I think it's a unique way of building your team and team building as well, because to your point, there's something intentional about taking the time and necessary, but also the narrative that you learn here about the history of these brave and courageous Black people who like often did things just one person that spurred a movement. They also learn the narrative of their own team and learn things that they didn't know about team members, which helps break vulnerability and increase trust and accountability. And all of those things not only go to building better teams, but building teams that are more equitable.
I think the piece that you also do that after they've sort of gone through the emotional experience, you bring them back to the brain and they actually start talking about racism and bias. Like it's a conversation many leaders are having difficulty having inside the organizations, right? And so they're getting so much out of this program that they cannot do by themselves.
Another component, another piece, a part of your module, Ryan, is connecting the past to the present. So let's talk a little bit about that, because we want people to understand that we are not just only talking about the history. The training is grounded in the history. However, we do bring them forward 50 years, and we help them to understand how these things are still connected and still exist today. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. You know, the civil rights movement was successful because it had successful organizers. That grassroots organizing and that history led us to the desegregation of public facilities. It protected all citizens under the 15th and 19th Amendments with the right to vote. But in that same conversation, there are efforts to take away those constitutional rights. In many cases, the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s in a dynamic way mirrors what's going on in our country and society today. And it is important to acknowledge that you've taken many steps forward with marches, boycotts, and sit-ins, but you've taken 2 steps back with the taking away constitutional foundation rights that all citizens should have. You can see that the images of the civil rights movement are in black and white in 1963, but in 2020, it looked eerily the same. What we saw in the summer of 2020 following the senseless murder of George Floyd. And so when you can take a lynching of an Emmett Till and a lynching of a George Floyd, the similarities and the parallels there are extremely striking. And so the intent is to show, yes, we've come a long way from the era of the civil rights movement, but this movement, this call for justice and equality, and to end the lack of justice in our society is why the 50 years later is so important, because you can't say that this happened that long ago. This happened yesterday. This happened the week before. And so that's an extremely important part of this module that I think really speaks volumes to people coming in today, seeing that that history is still ongoing right now.
Anything you would like to add that we've not talked about already? Any of you? Any last points?
I think there's one other that's important, and it's we often get the question, so why do we spend so much time talking about the African American experience? And the reason is because, number one, first of all, the museum is grounded in that. But also, my work tells me that in many organizations, African Americans are still the most left behind group of all communities, right? And we believe that if you focus on those who are least represented and valued of us, you will actually improve the practices in your organization for all of us. And so what we say to the participants in the program is, you come here and you learn these techniques, which we call the journey to equity, grounded in the African American experience. But what we say to you, we guarantee that if you go back focusing on the Black community, you will actually improve your organizations for all individuals.
And I would add that the whole experience really reminds you of what we're in this fight for, and that's all of our humanity. You know, slavery, racialized capitalism was really built on the fact that blacks were inferior to white people, which we know is not true, and that has persisted. And to the extent that we can use all of our data, our history, our knowledge, knowing that, you know, our brains are the same, 99.9% of our DNA is the same, and really get back to our humanity and how can we make this a better society for all of us, for our children, for our grandchildren, which starts with recognizing history, acknowledging injustice, really trying to undo that justice and treat people in a fair and equitable way, which is really the goal, is to treat, you know, as Val said, knowing that as we bring up the least amongst us, it helps us all. And so how can we get to that in business, at home, in relationships, and really make this a more fair and just society, which is what life is all about.
Yeah. And I believe heavily in justice, and when you take something from people who were denied something so fundamental. In the preamble of the Constitution, we state, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. That doesn't happen. History has shown us that that doesn't happen. And so this is an opportunity for CEOs across the nation globally to tap into this information. With so much disinformation that's out in society today, this is an honest, genuine, and sincere opportunity to unchange a wrong to do a right. And so the best way to do that is to take on this, bend, don't break, take what you can learn from it, and then apply it to your own team and to your own daily life.
Oh, wow. This has been
That's a nice quote.
an
Bravo.
amazing discussion about the C-Suite Initiative training. Thank each of you for all of the work that you do, all of the commitment that you hold close to you, right? The passion that you have for this, for equity, for just driving change. So that's super important to me. I have been at this museum for a very long time now. And Dr. Janet, you mentioned about the experience of going through this museum. And I've had the privilege of seeing this through directing this project and seeing it actually working so well. It's just been something that's been inspirational for me, but also that same term of being transformative, right? And I would like for many of you to please reach out to us. Go to the corporateequitycenter.org, browse the website, see the different offerings that we have, and bring your group to the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee to experience the C-Suite Initiative training program. Thank you for listening.
Today's episode is brought to you by the National Civil Rights Museum, located at the Lorraine Motel, the assassination site of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It chronicles key episodes of the American Civil Rights Movement, examines today's global civil and human rights issues, provokes thoughtful debate, and serves as a catalyst for positive social change.